We're going to go through a boundary identification process, then the actual boundary communication process, so how to express what you've identified, and then a boundary negotiation process, basically just how to deal with objections around boundaries. And then once we've clarified all of this and made this super simple for you, the next plan is to teach you exposure response reprogramming tools. So for those of you who might have all this information and be able to wipe out some of the core beliefs around it through the earlier reprogramming activities, feeling good enough to set boundaries, feeling deserving of having boundaries, these sorts of things, we're also going to help you set them incrementally so that your whole sort of nervous system warms up and can start feeling safe around the communication and expression of boundaries, because it's not uncommon, as we were mentioning earlier, to actually have at your primary layer around fears of boundary setting this survival response, like setting a boundary will make me unsafe, setting a boundary will make me all alone and rejected and abandoned. So we're going to expose you, sort of repeatedly over time until it feels comfortable and safe and becomes your new normal more naturally. So let's start with the boundary identification process. So this is something quite simple. Remember I was saying earlier about how your feelings are your guidance mechanism. They're letting you know when anything is out of alignment. Step one of setting a boundary requires identifying when something feels bad. Okay? So identify a feeling for step one. Step two, identify why this feeling hurts. Okay? Like what hurt you and what is causing the pain. So I'll go through an example in just a moment. Step three, identify what you needed to happen instead. Okay? And step four, express it or negotiate it. So let's go through an example. Let's say you're working on your boundary identification process and it's about something very specific that happened to you today. So you're going to start by identifying the feeling. Maybe your boss dumped a whole bunch of work on you at the last minute. You're leaving at 5 o'clock and your boss is like, hey, can you finish this by tomorrow morning? And it's like 6 hours of work and I'm going to have to lose sleep. I'm going to, be up all night. This is so stressful. So there was a boundary that was crossed, right? First, you have to identify the specific emotion. So go to your emotions sheet in your workbook, and maybe you find that you feel overwhelmed, you feel anxious. Okay, so identify the feelings. Then ask yourself, why is this causing pain? And maybe you go, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose sleep. I'm afraid that I'm going to get sick from having to be up all night. I'm afraid that I'm not going to do a good enough job because I don't have enough time, and then I'm going to get blamed for it. And I feel like that's an injustice. Okay, so why the feeling hurts? These are your personal concerns. And the importance of identifying your personal concerns is that you're getting into the habit of taking yourself into consideration. Okay, remember, that's like the underlying art of boundary setting. And then I want you to identify what you need instead. Okay, so maybe I need an extension on the deadline. Maybe I need 3 days to do this. It's not possible. I'm happy to maybe compromise and do a little bit of extra work on this specific occasion, but maybe for a few days, not for, all night, 6 hours in one chunk. That's too much. And then you're going to practice writing out how you would express or negotiate it, okay? And I'm going to take you into like the actual expression part in just a moment. But before we do that boundary identification process is an example of doing something when you're clear already that a specific boundary was violated. Another way you can use this identification process before we go into the expression process is go home at the end of your day and just identify anything that made you feel bad. So maybe you aren't sure that there's a clear boundary violation. What I want you to do is just repeat steps 1 through 4 here, but looking at it from a different angle. So number 1, identify the feeling. Maybe you're like, yeah, around 4 o'clock I started feeling really overwhelmed. And you have to go back and be like, okay, why was I feeling overwhelmed? Identify, step 2, why you felt that emotion you identified in step 1. And maybe you're like, oh, because I got a call around that time from my partner asking me to make dinner, pick up the groceries on the way home, and clean everything so that he could have his parents come over later on in the evening, and I wasn't expecting any of this. I'm already feeling burnt out. And again, this is you practicing the art of understanding that your feelings are cause and effect and considering why you feel the way you do and building that relationship to yourself. And then once you have that, you can identify what you need instead. And then you can express or negotiate it. Okay? So you can use the boundary identification process. It's very simple, but it's profoundly effective. You can use it in a very specific place where you're already clear that a boundary is violated, or you can use it to review your day and see where there was any negative emotion or feeling and see what boundary was violated and what you needed instead in that area. So it can be an entry point into discovering that you have a boundary, or it can be a way of actually identifying what the boundary is so you can use that to express it when something's not sitting quite right already. Okay? So how do we communicate it? So our boundary communication process. Step 1. You want to start when you're communicating by validating the other person's sponsoring intentions. This helps you get heard by another person because it helps you build this channel of rapport so somebody feels seen, heard, understood, safe in an interaction where you're expressing a boundary, which is an absolute necessity in order to get heard. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more in a moment. So that's step 1. Step 2, you actually say your boundary. You express the clearly defined boundary you have from the boundary identification process, okay? So as an example, maybe it's, hey, boss, I need 3 days to do this, not 1 day. Okay, so it's the actual boundary. Step 3, you explain why. I'm going to come back to this and explain why this is important in the first place as well. Step 4, you finalize this with some sort of tagline that you can I'm going to give you some examples, but you can tailor this to meet your needs. But you might sort of close your boundary communication by saying something like, hey, if you can please respect that, I would greatly appreciate it. Or thanks for listening, respecting that would go a really long way with me, thank you. It just something to wrap up the process. And it's actually really important to have that step when you're creating a boundary because it closes it and it doesn't really leave room for somebody to poke at it further. Okay, so it's sort of a solidifier. So I just want to go back to these steps and sort of flesh them out a little bit, drill into them a little bit for you. So number 1, when you validate the other person's sponsoring intentions behind their action, what this means is you understanding their why behind the action instead of the action itself. So let's say, for example, your boss dumps that work on you, okay? And it's like, hey, I need this by tomorrow morning. And let's say it's just not feasible without being like a tremendous sacrifice, and maybe you just don't feel like that's an appropriate thing in the place that you're working in, okay? So if this is what happens, you want to turn around and be like, okay, what's causing this person to act that way? Maybe their action isn't appropriate. Maybe you're getting paid minimum wage and the person's asking you to do all this, work outside of what you're doing, and it's not really a fair exchange there. But instead of judging that action and being like, oh, my boss is selfish and rude and whatever, try to look at like what might be going on in this person. It really helps to depersonalize as well, by the way. What's going on in his life or her life that is creating that type of action that violates my boundary? And maybe you're like, you know what, it's a family-run company and they're having a tough time. And he's probably worried about, or she's probably worried about all of their family members and what could happen if something doesn't work out. And so, they're probably carrying this really heavy weight of survival and family and trying to fix things on their shoulders, and so it's spilt over, okay? Now, when you understand this and you go approach somebody and you communicate this, like, hey, you know what? I know it hasn't been an easy time. I know you're under a lot of pressure, and you start that way because when we are conditioned as children, that often like conflict communication where we have a disagreement of needs is this negative thing, and it's like there's a winner and a loser. The parent wins, the child loses. Naturally, because we've all been through that experience early on, when there's a difference in needs, the subconscious mind tends to associate this with conflict and with something negative and with a winner and a loser. And that's why we fight for right or wrong, because we go into this like deep survival-oriented defense mechanism that comes up. So we're trying to avoid that out of the gates. And that's why it's so important to start by seeing, understanding, and validating somebody else's sponsoring intentions first. Not only does it take that like personalization out of you and your experience, like, oh my gosh, my boss is so selfish, how dare he or she do that, right? Not only are you removing that out of the mix, but you're also going into communication, building a channel and sort of extending an olive branch and like holding a hand instead of creating a separation. It's a joining again instead of a splitting off. So you might start by saying, hey, I notice you're under a lot of stress at work. I know it's, not the easiest time, but I unfortunately cannot get this done by tomorrow. I have other commitments and it's just not appropriate for me at this time, or it's just not feasible. And what I actually need is 3 days to do this. And so what you've done here is you've added your steps 2 and 3. You've expressed your boundary. I need the 3 days and I've got some other commitments. It's not appropriate. And when you explain your why, okay, I have other commitments, you don't have to like bare your soul and tell everybody the personal details of all of your life. Like, I have to go to the grocery store, I have to cook dinner, my parents are depending on me, my spouse is going to be mad at me. Like, you don't have to go into all the details. You can just explain your why, because what happens is it forces that person to also take you into consideration. Why? Because you considered yourself and you showed them. And in that moment, you teach that person how to treat you, and you remind that person, because sometimes when people are stressed, they need the reminder that, hey, in fact, you're a human being too. And, it doesn't make your boss a bad person if they forgot that for a split second, but it's not uncommon that when people are under stress themselves, they get the blinders on and they're so hyper-focused on their own small personal reality that they lack the ability. And anybody can relate to this. If any of you have ever been under stress, you'll see, like, under more stress, we lose our ability to empathize and think about other perspectives as easily, because we're in fight or flight in our own little perspective, right? So you remind somebody in a way, as you're connecting to them and understanding where they come from, hey, this is my reality and it needs to be considered too, but you're doing so in a gentle way and you're being clear about what your boundary is. And then by following that up and solidifying that with a thank you, if you can please respect that, I would greatly appreciate it, you don't really leave room for the boundary to be negotiated, okay? So again, validate the other person's sponsoring intentions, depersonalize it for you, state your boundary, explain the why, solidify it at the end by a please respect that, I would greatly appreciate it, okay? And you can tweak that last line there for yourself. So that's our boundary identification process, and then the boundary communication process. They're each 4 major steps, okay? Now, this might be new to you. So if you are new to this whole thing, just go home, even if you're not practicing setting boundaries in the moment that something is violated, go home and just fill out that worksheet, those 2 worksheets of each of those processes every night before you go to bed. Just pick one out, because what you're doing is you're getting your brain into the habit of thinking this way, and through practice it will feel normal, and then expression will be a natural next step, okay? And we will go in a moment after the boundary negotiation process here into actual exposure response pieces, okay? So if you think there's a type of person who needs to negotiate, maybe it's a parent that you've always sort of had a tough relationship with, maybe it's a relationship that you're currently in romantically and it's been on the rocks for a while, and you're like, I might need to go back and forth. I'm gonna communicate my boundary and they're gonna poke at it, okay? So then we go into the boundary negotiation process. This is what you want to do ahead of time, and this is what you want to practice, okay? For stickier situations, the first thing you want to do is write down all of what you think the person's sponsoring intentions are going to be when they poke at your boundary, okay? Or around a situation that involves a boundary violation. So do a dump, okay? And then write down yours. So what does this mean? Let's say, for example, that let's say we'll use the same example where you're gonna communicate to your boss. And you think the boss is gonna turn around and go, no, I need this tomorrow, okay? So you want to write all of the different intentions you think that they have by pressuring you, and then what you think their needs are in the situation for why they're so, hyper focused about getting this done within a certain period of time. And then after you've dumped all those things down, so you can really understand their perspective, and what this is doing when you understand their perspective, Essentially, it's getting you a step ahead in the thinking process so you can better communicate in real time, okay? Then you're gonna write down all of your needs and your intentions for having the boundaries. Then, ahead of time, I want you to find a place of compromise so that you're able to look and know that, hey, this is a place where we could compromise based on what I can understand from their needs. And you're not going to be a mind reader, but it'll give you a step ahead in the thinking process. What are their needs and what are your needs, and what's a common ground you can reach? And what I want you to do in this negotiation process, and this is specifically applicable more so in like the workplace, but it can apply to certain interpersonal relationships as well. What I want you to do is when you go to communicate your boundary, if you think this is going to be a difficult person or a difficult process, you do not start at where you're willing to leave. Okay? You don't start at the end of your compromise, you start 1 or 2 steps back. Because chances are, especially if you're here doing this course and you already struggle with boundaries to begin with, you're not going to go in and be like, this is the compromise, and then say it, and the person's not going to push back, and then you're going to end up making a sacrifice because you went 2 steps ahead of what was actually fair to you. So if you need to work on your boundaries and you need to work on trusting yourself with boundaries, you're going to dump their needs on paper, what you think they are, dump your needs on paper, what you know they are, find common ground in between, and then take 1 or 2 steps back, relative honestly to how much you struggle with boundaries. So if you like are horrible at setting boundaries and this is really hard for you, maybe even take 3 steps back. Okay, so here's the example to make it super clear. Your boss wants it by tomorrow. Your boss's needs are to get this done because there's some kind of deadline for he or she, right? You look at your schedule for the week, you have other commitments to your family, to your friends, to your romantic partner, to other things that you're passionate about, your hobbies, and you look and you're like, tomorrow is not possible, and in fact, neither is the next day, but day 3, 2 days from now is possible, but that's as far as I'm willing to compromise because anything other than that is going to disrupt the commitments that are important to me tonight and the following evening completely. So I'm going to try to go for 3 days. Maybe you think your boss is going to super pressure you, but you're like, you know what, I know what they need is to not disappoint the person that they've made this commitment to. So a suggestion that I could have as part of the compromise is like, why don't we just communicate ahead of time that there was a disruption in the workplace and, we're going to work really hard, we're going to do an extra good job, and we're going to have it at this point in time, okay? So for you it's day 3. Don't go in and communicate day 3. Okay, go in and communicate day 4. Like, give yourself that extra day because you're probably going to get pushed to day 3. And in fact, if you start at day 4 and then they get you day 3, they'll actually feel you budging and they're going to feel like you're a part of that compromise and negotiation. Okay, now I don't want you to do this to like manipulate people and be like, let me always overstate my boundaries and then I'm always getting my way. Like, don't do that. Do this from a fair-hearted process, right? But the idea and the principle here is the same theme throughout this course. The practice and art of taking yourself into consideration and really looking at your life. What is fair for me? What am I willing to budge on? And how can I make those compromises, not sacrifices, okay? So now that you've done this, you take the boundary communication process and you just bring this into it. So validate their emotions ahead of time. Say that you understand their needs. You can kind of add them, okay? Add the expression of understanding their needs, not just their intentions or their emotions. Then you express your boundaries and your needs and you add your why, right? And then you can let the person know here in step 3, we tweak it a little bit, that you're open to compromise and that you want to take both of your needs into fair consideration. And then step 4, instead of just expressing, you leave room for that negotiation. And so you express a boundary, but you leave room for something to be communicated through so you can come to a common ground. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So you might say to your boss, I would ultimately love 4 days. I'm willing to work with you on this. I see that it's important, but I know that I can't do anything more than 3. So how are you feeling about 3? And, I'd be happy to shoot an email to the person and let them know we're doing our best and we're running a little bit behind. Okay, so maybe you take responsibility for communicating on your boss's behalf, whatever it is. You can add little sort of bits in there together, but there's a collaborative effort towards compromises in a way that you know that whatever you agree upon, you've defined your hard boundary ahead of time, you're not budging, so you're going to walk away from this feeling like you're supporting and helping somebody else, but not at the expense of yourself or the relationship between you and that person, because you're not creating resentment. And remember, there's a big difference between compromise and sacrifice, and it's most important in your personal relationships, because compromise takes both parties into consideration, showing up authentically and expressing needs to find a middle ground, and it benefits the relationship the most long term because of the fact that no party walks away with resentment or frustration. Okay, there's an awareness of both parties' needs, there's clarity, there's honest communication, and then there's a working together, a collaborative effort. And this really reiterates that point that a compromise is a joining, a sacrifice is a separation on one or both parties' parts. So for exercise 3 here, this is the boundary identification process. And this is a step-by-step process to help you in identifying your boundaries. You can use this in real time if you feel as though a boundary is being violated. And you can also use this to reflect back on a previous boundary violation and then convert the way you felt into words so that you can start communicating. So let's start with the feeling. So maybe this was something that happened at work, okay? Maybe you say, I felt overwhelmed. Maybe you're in the office and you say, I felt overwhelmed today when my coworker asked me to do all of his work because he was behind. Okay? This is to finish the sentence. Maybe you say, I felt overwhelmed today when, X, Y, and Z took place. But just really focus on the situation here. Okay, it doesn't matter if it fits in perfectly with the with the sandwich here in the sentence. And then you're looking for how to identify this hurts. Okay, so this feeling is communicating to me what? Okay, so maybe you say, it isn't fair for me to take on all of his work, or that I already have too much on my plate, or that I need to start saying no and feeling safe to do so. Okay, so you're just picking up the key components there of what the feeling is communicating to you. And then you're going to identify what you needed instead. So maybe you say, I needed him to understand that I have a lot of work to, and to ask someone else. Okay? Or you needed X, Y, and Z to happen instead. Or what did you need to feel relief? Maybe you say, I needed to be able to say no in a way that he wouldn't be offended by in order to feel relief. Okay? So you're looking at that, and then you're diving in here, and now that you've clarified all of this, you've converted the feeling into words, you've identified what your needs are, what you would need to feel relief, you are literally just putting it together, okay? So I would say to Bob that I have a lot on my plate as well, and while I would love to support him, I am unable to do so at this time. I would like to suggest that he also work on boundaries with how much he is taking on, and I'll let him know I am also trying to do the same, and I appreciate his understanding. Okay, so you can just sort of break this down and make it really clear, like, okay, this is exactly how I'm going to communicate in this way. And this is your process that you can use whenever you feel like something is violated. You go back through steps 1 to 4 to identify your emotions, understand the accompanying feelings that signal a boundary would have been appropriate at the time, and you identify what you need to happen instead and how you would best express it. And that is the boundary identification process. Really simple, but extremely powerful and important as we are working to set boundaries. So, exercise number 4, this is going to be a process to negotiate your boundaries that you've identified in the last exercise. And you can use this at any point in time, okay? What I find is that when we are trying to communicate boundaries, sometimes people can feel, especially more sensitive people or insecurely attached people or people who have like sensitive wounds around certain things, sometimes they can take you setting a boundary as like shaming them or criticizing their behaviors. So a really healthy way around this, like we talk about in this actual exercise, is to literally start by validating the other person's sponsoring intentions if you can. Because, and I say this, and I can't say this often enough, when we want to get connected, when we want to communicate, when we want to get seen, heard, understood, we have to keep this channel of communication open. If we let it close because we're not communicating the best way that we could, then there's almost no point in communicating because nobody's hearing us. And so it's like we're what's that expression? It's like you're breathing hot air, or like whatever the expression is. It's like it's pointless. It becomes pointless to try to bother. So we want to find a way of communicating in a way that gets heard and keeps the channel of communication open. So you would start by validating the other person's sponsoring intentions. What does that mean? It means looking for like the innocence in their actions and where it might be coming from, just from like a normal human perspective. So instead of somebody like, you know, it can be very helpful, instead of seeing somebody as aggressive, to be like, and mind you, like if somebody's like physically aggressive, get away from the situation. But like if somebody's aggressive in their speech, like, you know, what I have conditioned myself to try to hear is like, whoa, they really want to get a point across because they're either really afraid or they think this is really important or they're really wounded in this area. And it's really rare that anything falls outside of those things. And when we look at somebody and we're like, oh, you're being aggressive, we judge, we shut down, we don't hear them, we communicate not so well back, and then we get into like nobody hears each other and it's just conflict. But if we can get into a position where we're going, okay, I can see that this is really important to them or they're afraid, we can lead with that. Hey, like I can see how important this is to you. Then you say your boundary. So and it could just start off as like, I see how important this is to you, but I really want us to have peaceful communication. I want us to like tone it down a little bit collectively. I want us to stay calm and on the same page because, which is step 3, explain your why. Okay, because I want us to work through this together. I want this to have a positive outcome. If you can please respect that, I would greatly appreciate it. And then you can open, so this is the way that you want to communicate your boundaries. Okay, so let's just use this as an example. So you've identified your boundaries from the earlier exercises, and then you're trying to find a way to put this into words so that you can package it nicely, keep the channel of communication open, and increase your chances by far of getting heard. Let's say the person, let's just say it's certain topics, okay? Hey, I see that this is important to you to discuss, and I can definitely see why these discussions are important at some point in time of the relationship, right? But I don't feel comfortable discussing these topics at this time because, and you want to put your personal reasons there for you. So maybe it's because I don't want to move the relationship too fast, because I like to take my time to really get to know somebody before I explore the sexual area of a relationship, because I really value emotional connection first before physical connection. Whatever that is, you explain. So you've kept channel of communication open by not saying, hey, I don't feel comfortable talking about sexual things in the relationship. And then the person can feel like shame and frustration and then not want to talk about it at all at any point in time, or shut down, or feel, you know, so you keep it open. You say, hey, like, I think these are important discussions to have, but maybe once the relationship is further along, we should have open discussions about these areas. I don't feel comfortable yet because I value having emotional connections in the relationship first. and really strengthening that, because then it makes those topics feel safer for me, or more comfortable, or more open. If you can respect that, I would totally appreciate it. And is there anything that you want to share with me in terms of boundaries? And it packages everything really nicely. Okay, so this is this exercise. The point here is to be able to go through and share. Like, I can see why these discussions are important, but I don't feel comfortable just yet. I value emotional connection first. I'm trying to slow myself down so that you guys can take the time to write out any ideas that are coming to you with your workbook right now. If you can respect that, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay? And so this is something you can return back to at any point in time. This is something you can come back to when you're actually having the experience of trying to have this conversation in real time and you want to reflect on the steps. This can be something you come back to when you're trying to think of what to say next in a relationship in your life. This can be something back to if you're like, oh, there's this person who violates my boundaries at work and I want to go back and say something, but I'm afraid to. Great. Use all these exercises step by step as your guiding force right now. Okay? So I hope this makes a tremendous amount of sense so far. So let's discuss a little bit more about dealing with objections. So, this might be really new to a lot of you, right? The actual art of boundaries. It's often not taught in families. It's not taught in our workplace relationships. It's not taught in school with our peers. And there is such a need for this because it really, I would say this is one of the top 5 factors, if not the top 2 or 3, of what impacts the overall health and well-being of any relationship in our lives. Now, it may take time to become masterful at this, right? Because it can be so new for some of us. But this is why you have to work on reprogramming those core beliefs first, like we were talking about in the earlier module, believing that you don't deserve to have boundaries, believing that you're not worthy, working on that first, identifying your boundaries in the 7 areas of life and getting clear so you can set those boundaries ahead of time second, and then using the tools of the actual, real-time boundary identification process, communication, and negotiation processes third. Okay? Now, what I recommend doing is just practicing boundary work on a regular basis. Every evening, 15 minutes, go through the worksheet, see what comes up for you, play with it. You're not just going to find, that it comes more easily to start communicating boundaries and being aware of them in real time and all these different things within your interpersonal relationships, but you are also going to find out so many powerful and impactful things about yourself that you didn't realize because of doing this work. So it should be, hopefully it's fun work, it's interesting, there's all these golden nuggets and aha moments and realizations, and long term this is going to benefit your health, your well-being, your feelings of joy and fulfillment in life, and your relationships to every one of the 7 areas of your life. Your career and how you feel about it, your working relationships and career, your family relationships, your romantic friendships, everything. So, create the pockets of time to do this work for yourself. Now, if you're like, I have never set a boundary in my life, this is terrifying, so difficult for me, another little tool here that you can use to sort of hack the system and speed up the process is visualization. So if you're working with a difficult person, okay, now let me be clear about difficult person. If it's a person who's an abusive person, your boundary is going to be get out of the relationship altogether, okay? If it's somebody who's physically abusive, verbally abusive, any of these things, you have a hard boundary, an absolute boundary, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But if it's just somebody who's challenging, they're just a little bit stubborn, or they don't deal well with negotiations, things like this, I recommend trying and allowing this person to be your teacher. Look at this person as, okay, they're difficult, I'm going to keep practicing and tweaking my boundaries with this person until I reach a state of mastery. They're actually the perfect person to help me achieve that, because they're going to give me some pushback and challenge me, and they're going to help me pivot and try different phrases and different approaches and really bring these tools into real life so that I can become extremely masterful with my boundary setting. So how do you do this? Number 1, you're dealing with a difficult person, you pick a time period that you would want to commit to this, okay? And the reason for this is that we want to pick a time period that is feasible for us. If we're like, hey, I'm going to work on this relationship to my friend who's been treating me not so great lately, and I'm going to do this for 4 years, and you're just going to go through 4 years of misery, may not be worth your time whatsoever. If it's a friend and you're like, you know what, it's been a rocky time lately, we've had some miscommunications, I'm going to work on this for 6 weeks and put all my energy and effort into like really trying this, and then if I see that it's not going to work, then I can just move on guilt-free, regret-free, know that I did my best and learned a lot from my practice of boundary setting in the process. So it's a net benefit to you no matter what, and if anything, a huge net benefit to the relationship. So pick a time period that's appropriate for, based on the investment you have in the relationship and the degree of closeness that's there, right? It might be a different time period for a family member than for an acquaintance or a colleague, right? So that's step one. Pick that time period that works for you. Step two, work your butt off during this time. Tweak your approach, try different taglines, different closing processes, in the boundary communication process. Like you might say, if you can please respect that, it would be greatly appreciated. For somebody who's more difficult, you might say, hey, that's a really big non-negotiable for me. I hope you can understand. Like tweak that closing line, see what works for you, play with this. Like make this sort of an artistic thing that you create and you work on and you tweak and you add to over time so that you're really making this yours and your truth, okay? This is for you, like point blank period, this is for you and the overall health of your relationships long term and your life. Step three, if there is no positive response or progress, you then know that you have to set an absolute boundary, okay? Or at least a larger boundary. So you can ask yourself a question like, on what scale can I have this person in my life before it just really causes unnecessary negative feelings for me? And tune into yourself, consider yourself, it's the art of considering yourself, and find out what feels correct, and then you can set a boundary accordingly, okay? So you might go, you know what? If I don't see any progress in a few weeks, I just know I can only talk to this person once a month, or I can only talk to them on a surface level in the workplace. I can't have those deep conversations and share with them any longer. Whatever it is. And remember, this is healthy. You are not bad for doing this. This is a very good, healthy thing. And your answer might be, like, if I don't make progress with this person in 6 weeks, I can't have them in my life at all because it's been too long, it's been really painful, and this is causing too much toxicity to keep trying to run up into these conversations and hit sort of a brick wall. So pick the time period, pick the boundary. If it's an absolute boundary, like I can't have them in my life, that is perfectly okay. What's healthy versus not healthy is how much you're taking yourself into consideration or not, okay? And remember, practice makes perfect. Boundary setting can be challenging at first. You'll look back on it and you'll be like, oh, it's actually quite easy to do, to communicate. But it's challenging at first because it's so new to a lot of us, right? And you might find yourself lost in the moment sometimes. And if you do, that's why it's so important to practice visualizing ahead of time. So practice setting your boundaries in all forms ahead of time as well, okay? And visualization can be the act of imagining yourself actually setting the boundary. So let's say you go home, you're doing the boundary identification process, you're doing the worksheets at night, you can actually sit, close your eyes, and visualize yourself setting these boundaries and communicating and saying them to a person. And it might sound like a little silly or a little over the top, but there is a tremendous amount of research that has confirmed to us that our brain has a great degree of difficulty telling the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And your subconscious mind especially, this is sort of where that piece of research comes from. And so visualization really familiarizes your subconscious mind and it prepares you for the in-the-moment success. If you've practiced and imagined and visualizing speaking to that coworker, asking your boss for that extension or that raise or whatever it is, and you've practiced this in your mind ahead of time a significant number of times with your partner, with your family member, in the moment, your brain's going to actually feel like it's natural to communicate this way, okay? And there was actually a research study done that took basketball players and it had them shoot 3-pointers, and then it had them take a break from shooting any 3-pointers at all, And instead, they had to go sit at home on their couch and they had to, for 30 minutes a day, visualize themselves shooting 3-pointers over the course of that 2 weeks. And research showed that there was a 27% improvement in just those 2 weeks for these athletes who visualized the 3-pointers just from sitting there for that 30 minutes a day. Okay, so this applies to all facets of our lives. I've worked with a lot of clients historically who are afraid to speak up. They do this work and it has tremendous impact. So in the next module, we're going to go into exposure response reprogramming, which is the act of like speeding up everything you've learned so far by taking action in incremental bites. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to implement this and sort of bring it all together and tie it all in so that you can have a daily actionable activity that really fast tracks you on the path to setting boundaries and having more fulfilled relationships in your life as a result. Exercise number 5. This is your boundaries awareness exercise. Okay, so this exercise is going to help you to examine the situations that trigger repetitive negative emotions for you. Then you'll uncover what your needs are, how to best meet them, and further question autopilot patterns or habits. Okay, so these are going to have a lot to do with like self-boundary violations a lot of the time, at least. Not always, but you're probably going to see more of them come out of that area. So you're going to look at like the major emotions list in your materials section of your workbook, and then write down the patterns of negative emotions you feel most often. Okay, and this is you just noticing and checking in to see some of the patterns in my life that I feel stressed about or that are not healthy for me. Is it because I'm not setting boundaries, or is it because I have needs that are unmet and I'm just letting those things fall by the wayside? So just a simple example we used. Okay, I often feel anxious when I'm rushing. Okay, so what do you need in order to feel better in this situation? Okay, so maybe you need to let someone know that you are running behind, and maybe you feel like people are pressuring you. Maybe it's a specific friend in your life. Okay, so maybe it's your one friend, and the moment you're 1 minute late, she's very stressed out and takes it very personally, and so you feel this pressure in that relationship. And maybe you have twins that are just born, and maybe you're working full time, and maybe not just born, but like you have young kids, you're working full time, you've got responsibilities to other people, and maybe you just feel like, hey, I need some slack cut in my life because I've got a lot on my plate right now. And so maybe you need, to let this person know that I'm running behind, but maybe I need to feel more comfortable around my friend and time. Okay, so what is your strategy to get this need met? So I can get this need met by sharing vulnerably about my life and all of the things on my plate so that I can be understood and feel safe to share or have the boundary respected. Okay, and then you're just asking yourself, so this is really like the breakdown of being able to cement in this process. What commitments can I make to myself in order to continue meeting these needs regularly? Okay, I can make the commitment to see my needs through. I can make the commitment to share often and more vulnerably with others about what's happening in my life. Maybe you take this a totally different perspective. Maybe you're like, I need to ask for more help because there's so much on my plate. I need to ask for more support in my life so I don't have to fall into a situation where I find myself running late to things. Maybe I need to, choose friends that aren't giving me a hard time for all these little things and are critical of me all the time. Like, you could take this so many different directions. But this is for your personal exploration, right? What do you need? And what sort of golden nuggets can you extract from the situation that are very personal to you? Okay, and then you're taking an extra step here of inventory to try to notice what patterns or habits cause you to abandon your feelings and needs on autopilot when you're in this position. So, for example, maybe you're running late to this friend. She's critical about you being late. You are sitting there thinking like, oh my goodness, she's going to be, and you get so lost in what she's going to think of you and the fear of being disliked or being bad or whatever core wounds might come up for you there, that you get so distracted by that that you forget to think about yourself and your feelings and your needs and humanize yourself and see where you're at in your life. And then it takes you away from the experience of being able to work through this with her. Okay? And so this is what this set of questions is asking you. What am I afraid will happen if I don't? And where does this come from? Like, what are the earliest patterns in here? So just take some time to journal. So you could just say, for example, I focus on her feelings more than my own. Maybe this comes from feeling afraid of being disliked. And maybe this comes from childhood and your older siblings. Okay? So that's the process you're going to go through. It's really taking like a full snapshot of the patterns that you have and what's not working and really deeply understanding the root causes as to why. And remember, the more information and material we make conscious ahead of time, like it becomes so much easier to navigate these things in real time, to understand our patterns, to speak up. So all of this like inventory work you do now is going to save you a lot of time and energy going into the future and future situations. Okay?
that, Catherine? Have your towel.